All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good day, wherever you are on the planet. Welcome back to another episode of the Accounting Alchemy Network's Lyceums. Today is actually a spotlight Lyceum. We're really excited to be bringing to the table or to the stage, to the page, whatever I'm trying to say here. One of our very own co-founders, Alina Nikishina. We'll learn a little bit more about her, and Ingrid will kick us off in an introduction in a moment. But for those of you who don't know, who we are. This is the Accounting Alchemy Network. We are a community of accounting professionals out to empower other accounting professionals to stand in their power and create change for the world around them. That looks different depending on what kind of an accounting professional you are and where you're at in your journey. We've got all kinds of programming to support you on that journey. So if you're brand new to the world of creating change through social and climate justice, for example, we've got programs to help you understand what's going on in the world and how you can take action by simply doing things like starting to recycle or composting, et cetera. And for those of you who run firms and practices and want to take it to the next level, we also have programming for you. So for example, if you want to effectively address racial equity issues inside of your firm, we have some really cool stuff going on under the umbrella of JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So if you want to know more, go to accountingalchemy.net. Check out our website. We lay out a lot of content there about who we are, what we stand for, and also have a fabulous framework for you to enter into this work through our playbook. Check out the website. You'll see a playbook there. You can watch a YouTube video, understand about who we are, how we got to where we're at today, learn a little bit about this concept called the regenerative accountant, which is something that we want everybody to know about. So if you're in the accounting profession, please aspire to be a regenerative accountant. Hint, hint, go to our website to find out more. And with that, I'm going to pass the ball over to Ingrid to introduce our Spotlight Lyceum guest today. Alina, over to you, Ingrid.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I am really, really excited to be welcoming Alina Nikishina to our Lyceum today to focus and spotlight because Alina is one of my very best friends and a co-founder of the Accounting Alchemy Network. However, Alina, since we started this adventure a couple years ago, you've been like, you guys be the front people. I'll hang out in the and we would not be able to do any of this without Alina. Alina does so much on the back end of the Accounting Alchemy Network and also just in our collaboration as kind of a team of founders of this idea. Um, so much to support me and Matthew. And a huge part of that is your depth of knowledge into subconscious programming and how to overcome some of those things. And it's been absolutely pivotal as we've been going through our own learning, growth, and evolution journey in creating the Accounting Alchemy Network. So super, super excited to dive in with you, Alina. And I would love it if you can maybe start by sharing a little bit about yourself and your background and how you came to the Accounting Alchemy Network in your own words.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for having me. I'm super stoked too to be here and yes, excited to share. So, as I've already been introduced, I'm Alina. I live in Washington State. I came to the Accounting Alchemy Network because I used to be an accountant. I was a CPA for about a decade. This is what I did, traditional career, like went to college, got my CPA, went to go work for CPA firms, did tax for a bunch of years. And yeah, I met Ingrid. Matthew, I don't think I met you in person, right? Now I don't remember. Um,
I can't remember. Well, yeah, unknown question mark.
regardless, but I definitely met Ingrid in person when we were in the think tanks for the 40 under 40 symposiums for CPA Practice Advisor Award and stuff. And Matthew was also part of that too. So yeah, and one time they were like, "Hey, we're putting this together and really love your brain." And I've come to realize that, I have some my brain tends to think more of logically and detail and like, I don't know, let's think about processes and how we're going to get things done, right? So good accounting skills, I guess you could say. So yeah, it's been really great. And how I've left accounting in 2018 and I've since started a coaching business and have been kind of restarting my career in essence. I mean, finding my way again. I was doing some business coaching. And as I was doing all of this, right, like transitioning, first of all, from this traditional life path. Okay, I also want to add that I'm originally from Russia. I lived there till I was 9. So I've come to learn from all this like subconscious work that I'm doing now that so much of who we are gets formed, before like age 7, 8. And I was like, oh my God, everything makes sense. The value systems that I developed from growing up in Russia were like, they were different, right? When I moved here and I saw kids saying things like, I'm going to be whatever I want when I grow up. I'm like, really? Because that's not what I was, yeah, taught when I was a child. So I know I'm kind of all over the place here. Where was I? Yeah. So the employee to entrepreneur kind of transition from that like value set to a completely new value set of like, hey, express yourself and be authentic and be seen, and like, let's play and get messy and not know what we're doing. And all of that like was not great in my brain. Like I had severe resistance. And of course I started doing inner work. I started doing coaching. I became a coach, right? And a lot of the stuff that I was doing before, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but it was making sense to me. I was like, okay, it makes sense that if I believe something, then I could just reframe that belief, right, to do something that is productive for me. And then that's it. I can just decide that that's what I want to believe. But that's not how it works for me anyway. I had resistance to my new beliefs that I was trying to create for myself. So that's when I came to subconscious work. I was like, oh, so these beliefs actually live on a subconscious level. And so we need a subconscious approach in order to be able to effectively change them. Because otherwise, people use a lot of force and willpower to create that inner change. And that's not very sustainable. So, or regenerative.
Love it. Thank you so much, Alina. And I love how you are really practicing what you preach, that how you wove in your kind of origin story of like, these are the things that you've been overcoming, the subconscious programming of the accounting profession, of your upbringing in Russia. So can you tell us a bit about subconscious programming? What is subconscious programming when we get into the roots of it so that everyone watching this can understand what it is we're talking about, and why is subconscious programming important to consider?
Yeah. So let's just talk about the subconscious in general, right? So subconscious is basically everything that we are not always aware of consciously, right? So somewhere between 95 to like 98% of all of our actions and what happens is directed by the subconscious. So all of our activities and decisions. And, our subconscious is also responsible for things like being a filter for our processing. So, we receive billions and billions of information, data points, right? Like right now, we're talking here together, right? And we're aware of each other's faces, and like I'm aware that I'm saying something, right? I'm seeing there's something in the chat, but like there's also things happening that I'm not consciously aware of, like everything that's happening outside. I have a window out there, right? Like all the sounds, everything in my room. Like my subconscious mind is aware of all of those things and it's processing it through filters. Because if I was aware of everything, I would literally not be able to function and have this conversation with you right now. So it's helpful. But these filters also it's kind of like wearing a certain lens, like glasses, right? So you're seeing the world through a certain set of lenses, right? That's why people say you create your own reality, partly, I think, because what is reality but our perceptions, to me, right? And our perceptions are created by our subconscious mind. So we can change the lenses, right? We can, that's part of the programming, is those perceptions. So that's one thing. So also the subconscious mind is responsible for automatic functions in our body. So like breathing, our heart's beating, right? We don't have to be like, go ahead, heart, do you beat now? It kind of works, luckily, for most of us anyway. And it also stores habits and beliefs, right? So if we do something enough with repetition, or we say something enough or start believing in something, it usually becomes like a program, right? A habit in our brain, in our subconscious mind. And so great for some stuff, right? Like I'm glad, for example, that I don't have to relearn how to walk every time I want to, and learn how to brush my teeth every morning, and um, talk. Right? Those are nice things. And also, there's some not so great things, right? Like that I learned as a child, or that I learned when I was an employee. Um, my brain is making meaning of certain experiences. And it's like, if you're listening, you may have heard of like rewire your mind, right? It's because it's literally like there's these maps and wires of connection points. It's like this means that, and then it kind of connects together, right? And so yes, in that same way, you can reprogram yourself, rewire yourself to create different meanings, to create different perception filters. Um, yeah.
Hmm. Cool. Thank you, Lena. So that's definitely the like what question, right? Which I really appreciate. And I think something that really stands out for me too is this idea of needing to rewire one's mind, right? And I remember a long time ago, I would often hear the phrase, "You can't teach an old dog new tricks," right?
Mm.
And that would be applied to human beings. It's like, oh, we get older and then we kind of get stuck in our ways, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? It's sort of the mentality, and I think that mentality is perpetuated itself and spread out, and it's you certainly can see it in the accounting profession in terms of attitudes and beliefs around not wanting to change, or not even understanding that change is possible, right? And so I think one of the questions that I would have for you in this context is the why question, right? So why is it so important that in the context of the work that we do at the Accounting Alchemy Network, right, where we're aiming towards more conscious leadership, we're aiming towards agents of positive change, right? We're wanting to have an impact on the world. Why is it that this work is an important precursor in some ways to actually being able to create change in the world? I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. Well, why use subconscious methods to begin with? Because they are effective. So, like, it's just a more effective way to create that inner change. And we could talk a little bit about, how people go about creating change that doesn't always work. Um, but I'm just thinking about, like, here in a minute we might get into some of those images we talked about earlier with like the regenerative accountant attitudes, and like what was shared in last month's Lyceum. And I'm also thinking about, like, the work that we've done with Jana, like on the Jedi stuff, right? Like unconscious biases that we have, right? um these hidden things that just by living in systems that were built upon ideals from like white supremacy and colonialism and patriarchy and all these things, right? Like racism. We're not always aware of what water we've been swimming in. And this is the work that we're doing here at the Accounting Alchemy Network, right? Is to like help bring things to the awareness level of like, hey, did you know that these things that we thought were just normal and have always been this way have not always been this way? And also, like, they're creating harm. And so then when you learn these kinds of things, you're like, oh man, sometimes just by learning them and that awareness alone is enough to create change. Sometimes you're like, oh my God, now that I'm aware, I'm just not gonna, no, I'm done, right? And also sometimes you've been repeating certain patterns and ways of thinking and being for so long that it's not so easy to just be like, I'm just not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to have a like black mindset anymore, or have these unconscious racist biases, or like, right? I mean, it still continues to happen. And I know that it's like ongoing work. But what I want to share today is about how there are actual methods that can help you make that work much more effective and easier. So,
I love that. I love the analogy of programming. We talk about subconscious programs, and the way that you talk about it makes me almost think of, a computer program that, we call it television programming for a reason, because the information that we are bringing in through our sensory receptors are creating neural synaptic pathways in our brains. And if those pathways, what fires together wires together, as Dr. Joe Dispenza says, if those pathways get really, really connected and hardwired together, it can be really hard to break them and change habits, whether that be a physical habit, or an addiction, or a mental thought process of, oh, I think this, and it leads me to this thought over here. So thinking about our biases and things like that, those are all programmed in. So what you're talking about with the subconscious reprogramming, the subconscious work, is almost like hacking the system. We are downloading new, I don't know, new BIOS, or like, upgrading our servers, or, changing out our drivers, or whatever we want to think about it as, to make it so that we can essentially upgrade our consciousness to
hmm.
be able to run the programs that we want to run consciously. And to a certain extent, also removing malware from our system. How the heck did those ideas get into our brains? My friend Fatima Mann, who leads the Love and Healing Work organization, she teaches this amazing class on leveraging white privilege to deconstruct institutionalized racism in our world. And she defines bias as somebody else's ideas in your head.
Mm, yeah.
So, yeah, just thinking about all of the unconscious and subconscious programs, and that the intention is to raise our awareness and say, these are the programs I want to be running. How can we be more conscious about choosing our programs and training our subconscious to run the programs that we want to run? And I'm wondering if you might have some examples for us, Alina.
Yes. I also, before we get into that, I want to say that another thing that our subconscious mind is always asking is, am I safe? And safety is usually connected with status quo. So that's when, like, when people have a hard time changing, and we're having a hard time changing as a collective right now, like, I have compassion for that because it doesn't feel safe to change. So creating that change, or creating that safety inside, is also really imperative. So yeah, let's look at some examples now.
Yay.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. So this is one of our infographics for regenerative accountant attitudes, right? So this is the attitudes that would be really helpful for somebody who wants to embody this identity. And let's just choose one, right? And we can brainstorm together, Ingrid and Matthew. Which one should we choose?
Ooh, this is a fun test. Wait, can you scroll down and let me
Yeah,
see?
yeah.
What else do we have? Okay, so holistic, relational, humane, and sufficient. I like sufficiency.
Okay. So sufficient understands that by
Oh, did she freeze?
She is
world.
frozen.
There we go. Oh, you're back now.
Okay. You were
A little,
just reading sufficient and you froze.
Who froze?
You
you
did,
did.
Alina.
And now you're
Okay.
back. So sufficient. Continue.
Okay. Did you hear me read the? Oh,
No, we did.
okay. So understands that by generously sharing resources collectively, there will be more than enough in our beautiful and abundant world, right? So what might prevent us from having a sufficient mindset, or like sufficient attitude?
Hmm. A belief that there's not enough in the world would prevent us from having that attitude.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
Scarcity programming, like Lynn Twist talks about the three toxic myths that are pervasive in our culture, the idea that there's not enough, more is better, and that's just the way that it is. So no point in even questioning it, because that's just the way that it is.
Yeah. Well, and I would also say like fear about like this piece about sharing resources collectively. It's like somehow if I give you the thing, I don't have the thing, and then I lack the thing. And then also I feel like culturally, at least in the cultures that I'm sitting inside of, um, there's this feeling of like you have to prepare for the worst case scenario and prepare for a future where you don't have things. And so then it's like, okay, I've got to collect and guard and hoard, right? So I think it creates like hoarding mentality
Hmm.
um, as well.
Yeah. So what we're discussing here, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hmm.
Okay, cool. My thing is slow again. Yeah, so what we're discussing here too, I'm noticing has a big connection to that safety piece that I mentioned earlier, right? Like not having enough um, is directly tied to that survival element, right?
Mm.
So if I come to you and I say, there's actually plenty here, let me get you a statistic about how we can actually share the world's resources if these things were in place, right? Um, you would be like, okay, now my logical mind is happy with that statistic, and I can see how I don't have to constantly feel like I'm in lack.
Mm.
Um, However, there's still this like knot inside my stomach that won't go away
Hmm.
Mm.
with that, you know?
Mm.
Um, so that's just one of them. Let's look at another one maybe. Like I like this humane one. It has quite a lot in here. So humane has an attitude of consideration, caring, being in right relationship, and recognizing responsibility to the collective. So they are considerate and responsive to people's unique needs, compassionate and empathetic, supportive of joy and work-life harmony, coachable, has a growth mind-oriented mindset, um, and fostering freedom and accountability. I mean, there's a lot here.
Yeah.
Mm.
So part of it is like maybe some skills, right? So how can we learn some nonviolent communication skills, for example, right? So we can communicate easier. But also, what might prevent us from being considerate of other people's needs or being compassionate and empathetic or fostering joy and work-life harmony, right? Like,
Yeah. There's
I
so
know,
many things. I feel like bias, like we were just talking about earlier, if people have been brought up in an environment of fear and hate, particularly if they've been taught to fear or hate another group of people, and they're bringing those biases to their workplaces, that's not going to create very good connections and relationships for people to work together who are different and come from different backgrounds. And
Mm.
then in addition to that, particularly in the accounting profession, there is the hierarchical business model that encourages competition between people,
yeah,
where it's a zero-sum game where, in order to win, somebody else has to lose, that people are currying for favor and there's one-upmanship and also, getting into wage disparity based on a variety of isms, um,
Mm.
sexism, racism, all of those things can create inhumane working situations. And there are so many layers and levels of unconscious beliefs to overcome to change that
yeah,
work environment.
Mm.
yeah. And part of it too is like behaviors that have just been done over and over again for such a long period of time, right? Like I don't know. I'm sure we touched on this somewhere. I can't remember some kind of social forum or something where we were talking about how accounting has like certain aspects of it, of like public accounting anyway, how it's just labeled as like nature of the beast.
Mm.
But like that's that's not the nature of the beast necessarily. That's just how things have been up to this point. But the behaviors continue to occur, right? Because they're habitual at this point.
Mm.
So, Matthew, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, something else that's jumping out at me, and it's interesting because I like I'm having a point of friction around the language, and I think it's important because it's like it's a valuable thing to bring forward in this example here, where it says right relationship, right? Like my definition of right is related to judgment, right? And so, oh, this is right, that's wrong. And so then all of a sudden I start thinking about um, like moral and ethical frameworks of evaluating what is right and what is wrong, and how we are to relate or not relate to each other. And I guess that I guess to kind of tie it back to like this whole thing about subconscious behaviors, patterns, and beliefs, it's like it goes back to what you said earlier about the fishbowl thing, right? It's like we, if we live in this water where it's ironic to say this, if we live in this water where it's okay to harm the earth and not take care of our water on the planet, then it's like, okay, that's the mindset and the attitude. It's like, oh, what is that? That's thinking that humans are more important or have more value than the water, and that the nature is here to be used, right? And so there's like a whole belief system sort of attached to that, and then I start thinking about on a subconscious level, there's sort of a microcosm of your own personal culture, and then there's like a macro culture and the culture that you live inside of, and then there's the historical context of what brought you and your ancestors to that point, and that all of that gets carried with you up to this point in the moment where you then decide, like, how am I going to treat this plant in front of me, or this tree in front of me, or this body of water in front of me. And we do it, I think we collectively, a lot of people like act without even thinking about what it means to be in quote right relationship. And so I'm kind of curious. This might be like a slight sidebar, but I'm kind of curious. And Ingrid, I want to poke you on this one a little bit. Is like, what does it mean to be in right relationships with something, and then how do you navigate that in the context of that? We all come from different cultural backgrounds, so what might feel right to me might not feel right to you, and yet how do we find that interconnectedness and that agreement or consent in the space between? It's a loaded question.
I love the question. You got
Oh,
my brain going in some really good ways. I think the most important thing when it comes to being in right relationship, I love that you called out the moral ethical disparity, right, wrong, good, bad, and that's where our subconscious programming likes to go when we think about what does it mean to be right?
mm,
Whereas when we bring in the idea of relationship, what does it mean to be in relationship? What does it mean to be in a relationship that feels good? And how
mm,
do we make it so that that relationship is healthy, effective, reciprocal, rather than transactional, which is a big part of the programming that we have been brought up in our current culture. And one really amazing example of this that is coming up in my mind just as you were calling this out, Matthew, is the book The Giving Tree. I forget the author's name, but it's a children's book that I grew up with when I was a kid about, journey of a young person growing up who best friend is an apple tree, and how through this story of this person growing up, the tree ends up, giving its apples and then its branches and then all of itself until like there's no tree left, and there's like an old man sitting on this stump, but this tree loves this little boy, and it's like supposed to be this story about generosity and giving. It's a story about extraction and how we are taking more than we give from our natural worlds. And but I don't know if that's what the author had in mind when they wrote the book. But when I was growing up, I was like, oh, what a beautiful story. And the tree cares about the little kid. Okay, good. But now as an adult looking back at that story, there's a question of how do I care about the tree? How does this become a full circle, well relationship that is reciprocal, where I get to take care of the things that take care of me? And that makes it so that those relationships are ongoing.
mm,
That's what it means to me to be in right relationship, is how do we actually acknowledge and appreciate all of the ins and outs. And sure, it might not be equal or evenly balanced in a moment, but hopefully the ebbs and flows kind of even themselves out. And, an example of this that has not been evening itself out over the last, many decades is climate change. That as a species, human beings have been extracting more from the earth than the earth can replenish. And as a result, there isn't enough for 7 generations into the future. We're not taking the future of our species, much less our entire planet and the other species we're creating mass extinction into account in our decisions. And as a result, we're not in right relationship. So how do we shift the way that we go about our choices to be more in alignment with what's really important to us? And in order to do that, we need to be able to take a good close look at our values and recognize the harm that is created when we are consciously or subconsciously living outside of our values. And how do we process through and heal that harm? And I think that's where I want to toss it back to Alina, because that's where subconscious work comes in really, really handy, is in working through some of those big challenging emotions that our brains say, not safe. I don't even want to talk about it. I don't want to think about it. I'm just going to keep doing things the way I've been doing them. How do we shift that pattern, Alina?
Yeah. And I want to just add to your discussion there that there's just a lot of this comes from fear, right? And like the safety aspect that I mentioned earlier is it just does not feel safe. And there is a fear that when you consciously, logically unpack it, doesn't always make sense, but somewhere inside your mind, there's a connection to survival aspects of, yeah, for you, your family, those you love, your communities, all these things, right? Um, you know, even I noticed as I was building my own, as I'm building my own business, and like just these patterns popping up of like, or even like learning marketing and sales and how they're talking about competition and like being the best or like being on top or capturing people and like sending them through funnels. And I'm like, there's just so much and it's just talked about like it's normal, because this is how you win. This is how you win in business. And then we have games like Monopoly and stuff like that, right? Like the person with the most points wins, most property, most biggest amount of money wins. And it's like
Even
this is
Monopoly has universal basic income worked into the gameplay to make it so that the game can continue to be played. And the game would not function without universal basic income.
true. But then the electric company and utilities like rips you off. Anyway, beyond. you know, um, what was my point there? What was I trying to do? I already forgot. Anyway,
How to
I know.
shift the programming.
Yeah, I noticed these aspects within myself, and I'm like, oh, I I've been working with like Ingrid and Matthew and the Accounting Alchemy Network to like shift my values, and I've learned so much, and I know that this inside does not feel right, and I want to shift this. Um, and yeah, and I've been working on it with what I want to share about today. So, I do want to talk about a little bit of a few ways that people approach interchange and how that can keep them stuck. I'm not saying that none of this works at all. I'm just saying that sometimes it's not always effective. So the first way, and used to be my favorite way because I just love figuring things out and you know, putting them in my mind and figuring out how they work, right? But the first way is by focusing on the mental understanding of the issues and challenges. So asking yourself questions like, why is this here? Where did it come from? What's the original root cause? Oh, I do this because of that. Oh, I do this because I'm a Capricorn rising and Aquarius moon, right? Like, I don't know. Like, we create these meanings, right? And then we're like, oh, this is why I do this. It's because my uncle told me when I was 7 that I'm not creative and all my art sucks, so now I never paint. Like, I mean, I think that's if you can become aware of these things, great. Sometimes, yes, you're like, oh, that was my uncle's belief, not mine. I don't have to carry that around. You could just let it go. That personally has not worked for me a lot of the time. And I spent a lot of time processing, figuring out the why, understanding, journaling. But really, what I've come to realize is that sometimes when you put so much focus on the thing that you're trying to change, you're actually reinforcing the connection and the actual program to begin with. The second way is people try to rely solely on willpower or force to change. So you're like, okay, so I have this, I don't know, I have this fear or like crappy feeling every time I try and, I don't know, go public speaking. I'm just going to try really hard not to do it. Like try really, really hard. And it doesn't always work. In fact, it usually makes things worse, right? Because you're trying to avoid something and push it down. And it's like, hey, I still exist. And you're like, no, you don't. Stop. So it'll pop up in different areas, right? Like if you suppress it here, it might pop up like, I don't know, as a rash on your face or like random ways, right? And I will also say that willpower has a battery. So that's why when folks New Year's resolution, sign up for the membership, for gym membership, right? And they're like, I'm going to do it. And they only focus on the behavior of like, I'm going to start working out every day. Eventually their willpower battery will drain. And then if they never actually created the beingness level, the identity level, the belief system that I am the type of person who cares about my health and I will commit to working out every day, they're probably not going to continue the habit. And then the third thing is distractions. So this is like, there's some obvious distractions, probably like getting on our phone, binging Netflix, eating a bunch of junk food, drinking, smoking, sex. I mean, whatever you want to say, right? Like all of these things that can kind of like help us numb and come to comfort. And then there's more things that like seem like they would be working, but they don't always actually create the change on the subconscious level. Or they would if you actually kept at them, but most of the time we're not consistent with them. So they're not done with enough repetition to change those patterns. But it's things like even like, you know, um, quiet meditation necessarily. I mean, that has its own benefits, but it doesn't always create change in the subconscious mind with the patterns that you want to change, or like yoga, or like any kind of massages, right? Any kind of like exercise or stress relief behavior. It's helps relieve stress for temporarily. It helps you come to presence in the moment. It helps you quiet the inner critic in that time. But then usually those patterns keep coming back, right? So, but yeah, so what I want to talk about today is something that I've been studying for the past year, and I've been doing this with self-practice, doing it with clients, is a method called core transformation. And what that is, it's a gentle, gentle process that can help us work with different aspects and parts of ourselves. So sometimes it's called like a form of parts work. And, like let's come up with an example, right? Like I actually didn't get to share this slide earlier, but let me share it right now. So this is just a screenshot from last month's Lyceum with Sarah Elliott and Brian Cush from Intend to Lead. They were talking about conscious leadership mindset, right? And I thought this slide was fantastic. It's just so specific, right? So let's like take any of these, right? For example, I don't know, don't show weakness is the old mindset, and the new mindset is vulnerability, is strength, right? So if someone came to me, let's say, and they were like, I want to do subconscious work on that, I would say, okay, so you would like to have this mindset that vulnerability is strength, right? So what prevents you from actually embodying this mindset, right? And they might say something like, Well, I every time I want to say something, I just have this little voice that's like, no one's going to take you seriously if you keep doing that, right? So we'll stop sharing for a moment, but in core transformation, what we can do is work with any like thought, a voice would count as a thought, I would say, or feeling that we have, or a behavior that we're noticing. And we can basically just connect that to a subconscious part of ourselves that's generating that, right? Because this client is coming to me and they're saying, um, I have this little voice that says no one's going to take you seriously. And yet the client is here saying, I want to change and have this mindset that vulnerability is strength. So it's not all of them that thinks no one's going to take them seriously. It's only a part of them. And because another part of them wants to change. Right. So that's like the first aspect of it. Did you guys want to ask questions or did you just want to keep going?
I'm loving this. I'm just, yeah, wondering like how could we almost do an example for people to see here of what
Oh,
this
yeah.
might look like?
That'd
Like
be cool.
there's a part of me that wants to get my cat. My cat is going crazy below me. You can't see it, but she's like, going crazy. Yeah, I would like to do an example. I think that would be really fun.
Hmm. I mean, does one of you want to be my guinea pig or
I'll be your guinea pig. I'm happy to be the guinea pig.
okay.
Cool.
Yeah, so Matthew, what is behavior, feeling, or thought that you would like to change?
Oh, Jesus. Let's see here. Yeah, I mean, I think there's something about like there's a part of me that thinks that I have to work like really long hours to keep up, right? So yeah, which I'm sure many people could relate to that one. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that
So
let's play with that one.
you said work a lot of hours to keep up.
Yeah, it's like if I don't just keep working, I'm never gonna get through the pile of stuff, right? Like it feels like
Okay.
there's a really big pile. And I feel like the only way to get through it is to just keep working, right?
Yeah. How does
That's
this manifest for you? Like, what do you notice happening? Do you
well,
work
it's things
really?
like I will set my alarm for 4:45 in the morning, thinking that like that's gonna be the solution. So I'll just get up early and start early and it'll work. And then like that doesn't end up working. And then I'll like, you know, maybe work into the evening and then somehow think that like oh maybe there's something about oh my creativity or my flow is better in the evening, so I'll try to convince myself that there's reasons why it's okay, and maybe there is reasons why, but and then it just kind of ends up sort of dragging the workout throughout the day, and yeah, and so then I just get curious about like okay, um I'm just working all the time. So like how like but so then but that anyways and then I just get stuck in the well, what is work? Why are we working? What is the purpose? And so then I also get caught in these like cycles. And then I start thinking like, okay, well, what work is important? What work is not important? How are these things connected? Is there anything I shouldn't be doing? Is there anything I should be doing? Could I get better at this? And so then I start analyzing the work,
Gotcha.
the way that I engage myself in the work.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds helpful to a degree, right? There's strategery going on there. You're like, hey, how can I look at my calendar here and what I am doing, what I don't need to be doing, right? And also maybe there's a part of you that, like you said, I need to keep working to keep up.
Mm,
Like that's the solution, right? And so what we could do is just like work with that belief that you have, right?
mm, okay.
If you just like say within yourself, like, I got to keep working to keep up, and just say, like, where's the part of me that has that belief? So it can be somewhere in your body or around you.
Hmm. Well, I feel like it's in my chest. Like up here is kind of like where my body's attention is being drawn to. Uh,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and we don't have time to go through the whole thing, but we can just do a little bit, right? But like what I normally do, sometimes I just do this like when I don't have a lot of time, right? So you said it was in your chest. So this
Mm.
is kind of the location of where I direct my questions and also kind of the directions where I speak to myself inside, right? So I'm
Mm.
going to say, so thank you, part, for being here inside, right? Thank you for being here, not because I'm condoning your behavior, but because I know you have a positive purpose.
Mm.
So that's one of the things, right, about this method is like we know that there's something positive underneath this
Yeah.
behavior.
Yeah. Well, and just to just kind of like expedite and be with you in this is like this gesture also brings up two things. One, it's like it's heart centered, right? It's the heart.
Mm.
And so then I'm like, oh, the reason why I work so hard is because I love the work that I do and I love the impact that I'm having. So it's like, oh, I'm being led by follow, but then there's also like this gesture of like, and stop, right? Like you put your hand on somebody's chest, that's a center of gravity, right? That's a center of momentum, and it's literally a stopping point. It's like, okay, you can stop and be still. And so
Mm.
as we're talking about this, I'm like, oh, okay, I see how there's something there, right? About the drive to work and then the heart-centered piece, but then also this need to be grounded and be stable and like a stopping energy, but that the stopping energy is also doesn't mean just because I'm standing still doesn't mean I'm not doing something. You know what I'm saying? So I don't
Yeah.
know. There's
I mean
something.
that those are interesting connections that you're making there. And perhaps maybe they're helpful for your own like change and connection, right? And like you might be surprised. So what we normally do in this method right after we think the part is we just ask the part, what do you want? And this response generally, so we're doing it with our eyes closed. We're kind of turning inward and we're noticing what we might hear or maybe what images we might see or a feeling we might have, right? Because the subconscious communicates to us through very subtle ways. It's not like a very like it's usually not very logical or linear. Sometimes it's just a weird answer that comes up. Like yesterday I was working with myself and the answer that came was like, I want to blend in with the wall. And I was like, what? That's not okay. Interesting. I did not see that coming. Um, but that's what happens, right? And sometimes we're surprised by what these parts of us actually want. And so when the part does answer what it wants, so like let's just ask your part
I
one
already
time.
know. I can tell you
Oh, what
what.
did it say?
It said break, like act like break, like stop, like stop. Like it's okay, but that it's okay to stop. Like it's like,
Okay.
as like there's nothing wrong with standing still, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's kinda like what it's saying.
So then what we do is we say, okay, part, thank you. And now I invite you to step into what it's like to already have taking that break fully and completely. And so
Mm.
then this is also kind of like a, inward process where you're kind of in, inviting this to happen naturally and not forcing it to happen. And then
Mm.
we could say, and then now part that you have this break,
Mm.
what do you want through having this that's even deeper or more important?
Mm. Yeah, so the two things come up. One, when you gave me the permission to have the break and that the break was being had, and then my body was like, oh, my lungs are expanding and my chest is softer and my shoulder blades are moving now. It's like, okay, so there's like less holding on, right? Going on. And then in that second half of that, it was like, oh, what you want is some space, right?
Mm,
Some space to like fill up a little bit, not to drive and go like this, right? Because I feel like a lot of the work energy is like rushing to the finish line and being as narrow as possible versus, oh, like it's spreading out and grounding and being broader. Like the work is different than what I think my body is thinking it's supposed to be. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a difference.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So then we would again thank the part and then we would invite the part to step into that. And then we'd ask, what do you want that's deeper? And what do you want that's deeper? And what do you want that's deeper? Right. And eventually what happens is all parts reach in what we call in core transformation, the core state of
Mm.
being. And these are states that are just states that are like,
Mm.
you don't need to get anything or have anything first in order to just step into them and have them. So, in the body, they generally feel, it's different for everybody, but like a deep meditative state, a deep state of presence,
Mm.
peace. Um, these states can be called, like one of my ones that comes up a lot is like just being, or
Mm.
like unconditional love, or peace, or oneness,
Yeah.
or wholeness. Um, and when you get to experience things like that, not on the conceptual level of like, oh
Mm.
yeah, we're all connected, but like you actually feel like you're connected without having to, I don't know, take any kind of substances to help you feel that way, right? You're like, oh man. So there's more to this process. We
Mm.
continue to integrate this core state then in and help you reflect on how everything that was said before the core state, so like, the breaking and the space and the expansion and stuff. Because what normally happens is your subconscious makes these like new connections. Like, oh,
Mm.
hey, this part that actually had a deep yearning for, let's just say oneness was the core state of this part that you were working with. Now that it actually has this, what do you call it? Because the subconscious doesn't know the difference between real and imaginary. So this whole time we've been inviting this part to actually have what it wants in reality, you
Mm.
know, reality of your subconscious mind. Um, it's like, oh, I don't actually need to force my way to get there anymore. I
Yeah.
don't have to, I don't have to try so hard with these behaviors that I had in the past to just get what I want, because I can just have it. Um,
Yeah.
it's kind of a tough subject too. It's a tough thing to describe logically. It's more
Yeah,
of an
correct.
experiential thing.
And there's layers to it. And like I've seen you perform these sessions and it's taken like, at least an hour plus, right? To like
Yeah, yeah.
so it's not something that can be done in like 30 seconds. But what I want to ask, because I know we're coming up on the top of the hour, so I'm going to kind of round this out with sort of a question I have for you. So you left the world of being a CPA, an accountant, and like you're in the world in a different way now. But if you could, I'm just curious, like there are people in the industry, in the profession, who are struggling with parts of themselves that understand that what they're doing is actually not humane, right? In terms of how they're treating themselves, how they're treating their employees, how they're treating the world, and they know that there's a part of them that wants to change, right? And I just get curious, like, okay, if imagine yourself like back then, when before you discovered all this other stuff, and you were like at the beginning or even maybe the middle of your career in that profession, what advice would you have to yourself to navigate transformation out of it into a different mindset? Like you say, I'm not trying to bring it back to like
Yeah.
this place that you were once at.
Well, first of all, I'm hoping that I would be in a group like this and that I would have support to help me, um, because at that time I did not, like, actually the second firm that I worked for, the owner was more progressive in his thinking, and like he actually like cared about his people, and it was great. I learned a lot about like more humane workplaces by working with him. And there was still, in some other areas, just a lot of like swimming in the water. Like I didn't really have a lot of people who thought differently or questioned how I did things, or
Mm.
and if it happened, it was very seldom. So first of all, I would hope that I would have community to help me continue to integrate like the identity that I want to be in and learn more and these kinds of things, and also to keep me accountable, right? To be like, hey, Alina, did you know that when you said this, like that actually could have been said a better way, or like there's a different mindset with that, because you guys check me quite a bit and I'm very, very thankful for that. Um, and also I would recommend to start an inner work practice. So I know for some people that could literally just be, uh, starting with something like 5 minutes of meditation a day, just so that you could be like, hey, I'm not just going to continue my same pattern that I do every morning when I wake up and take a shower and head into my car and go to work, and then I work and come home, have whatever, right? Like you break up the routine of like, no, I take time for myself and I listen to myself. And um of course, if you actually want to, if you're like, oh my God, I have these behaviors and thoughts and little voices and feelings that are like preventing me from being who I want to be and doing what I want to do. I have this fear, like I want to create change in my workplace, but I'm afraid, right? So check out Core Transformation. I mean, you can Google this. It's from Andreas NLP. That's the family that Connie Ray Andreas created this method. There's actually a free ebook on their website that you could check out to start reading about it. There's a book too. And of course, you could talk to me. I'll talk your ear off about it. But like, that's an effective way to create change with these patterns that keep happening over and over again. And you can do a self practice with Core Transformation. So, you could work with a guide like me, or you could actually like work with yourself. Um, so those are the things I'd recommend.
Love it. And thank you for that amazing example. I really love, Matthew, the example that you thought up, how applicable it is to probably most of the people watching this recording. Um, and also, I mean, as much as, yeah, getting to the root of something and into a core state might take longer, one little round of what you talked Matthew through, Alina, there was still revelation there and self-awareness built that is worthwhile in just 5 minutes. So just looking at like a little snippet of what could be possible, there's some really, really amazing things here. And I feel like the steps are fairly straightforward and simple.
Yeah.
And we're offering accounting professionals tools. Because a lot of times, what can I say? We're accountants. We need a workflow.
Yeah.
We're creating the workflow of like, it doesn't have to be like, oh, snap your fingers and suddenly you're in a core state and, this shame of, oh, if you're not able to get into a core state, then but if there's anything going on that we're not a fan of in our own thinking, our habits, whatever, that there is an effective path to follow that, like you said, is simple and gentle and easy to use, and that we have members of our Accounting Alchemy community who are versed in this. So thank you so much for sharing these tools and strategies. And yeah, just thinking about the attitudes and behaviors, like you mentioned of regenerative accounting, or the slide that you demonstrated of Sarah's transitioning from, old leadership paradigms to what kind of leadership paradigms do we want to foster? Asking each of ourselves, here I'm getting into my possibilist attitude and behavior. Um, what is possible? And if any part of us thinks that something isn't possible, questioning that part of us and what might that look like? And now I'm wondering if at some point we need to have like a follow up with a social forum or something like that where we can, talk through, what does it look like to create a more possibilist mindset, overcoming any limiting programming that is prohibiting us from believing that what we're working to create here in the AAN is possible.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And I would also say that, through this process, we mentioned something earlier in the regenerative accounting attitudes of being humane, and how one of that is like being considerate and responsive to people's unique needs.
Mhm.
Like also being considerate and responsive to your own needs
Mm.
instead of like pushing them down, right? Like not in your stomach, push it down, continue forward, right? It's like, no, there's a message.
Right.
There's
Well,
a reason
and
that it's there.
and it's no wonder why accounting professionals are notoriously dealing with health problems and,
Mm.
psychological problems like depression and anxiety and all those things. Like those health issues come from us ignoring our needs.
Yeah.
So what does it look like to shift those habits and create healthier lifestyles for ourselves, for our clients, for our colleagues, for our families? How about we, set a good example for our kids and want the best for them as well?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
with that, we're at the top of the hour. So many good things. I'm curious if either of you have any final thoughts that you want to toss in before we wrap up.
Yeah, I'll just say something really quick. I mean, I really appreciate this, Alina. So thank you, because the theme for the month, everyone who's watching at the Accounting Alchemy Network, is transformation, and I think transformation begins with us as individuals. And I think what my big takeaway is, it's like, how are you tending to the parts of who you are, and are you compartmentalizing and setting aside or suppressing parts of you that need to be heard, or are you listening and paying attention and in the context of humane leadership and the change that we're looking to see in the profession is going to start with a different kind of leadership by the people who are already in the position of power and influence to do something different. And so this framework opens up the possibility of changing those pathways for the people who can actually make a difference by changing how they show up in their office, right? And in their position of leadership. And so this is a really good framework for shifting the tides. You know.
Love it. Any final thoughts from you, Alina?
Uh, no, I think I've said a lot, except, just if you've been experiencing some kind of reoccurring patterns and you're like, I don't think this could ever change, it's okay. Like, it's okay if you have resistance. It's okay if you have the belief that it might not change. You could still use this method and you can actually work with that part of you that thinks it won't change, or with the part of you that's like, I don't actually want to do this. That's also welcome.
Yeah.
Because you're integrating all of these aspects. You're considering all these aspects. Yeah.
Beautiful.
So,
And where can people find you if they have questions and want to learn more?
yeah. So my website, alinanikishina.com. I also have a Subconscious Success Sunday newsletter that I produce every week where I just share tips and tricks on how to work with your subconscious mind. I put it on my blog on my website, and I'm also primarily on Instagram at Hey Alina N, or LinkedIn as well. You could find me under my name.
Beautiful. Yay. Thank you so much for joining us, Alina. This has been great. And we will
Thank
see
you.
you all again soon.
Yay.
Bye.